There's something about putting on The Simpsons late at night that feels different from putting on almost anything else. Not better necessarily, just different. Familiar in a very specific way, like walking into a room you used to live in and not having to look where you're going because you already know exactly where everything is. I'm not talking about all of The Simpsons, to be honest. I'm talking about a particular window, roughly seasons 3 through 8, somewhere between 1991 and 1997. The episodes that have this quality to them, warm but not soft, funny but not throwaway, occasionally quite strange, but somehow also the most sensible thing on television at the time they aired. The ones where Homer is recognizably human rather than increasingly cartoon, where Lisa's sadness feels like a real thing rather than a storytelling device, where even the most absurdist premise carries a little weight underneath it that you didn't entirely expect. If you asked most people who grew up watching the show to describe what The Simpsons is, they'd be describing those episodes. Maybe not by season number, most people couldn't name a season number if pressed, but they'd describe Homer winning a Grammy with a barbershop quartet, a monorail salesman singing his way through Springfield, Sideshow Bob stepping on a series of rakes for so long it stopped being a joke and became something else entirely, a man called Frank Grimes who did everything right and got nothing for it. Those are all from a very specific window. That's the window we're going to spend some time in tonight. This is going to be a long one. There's a lot to get through, and I'd rather take it slowly than rush anything. We're going to wander through this era the way you'd wander through a place you used to know well. Not taking inventory, not trying to see everything, just noticing what's still there and what it feels like to be back in it. So, a little bit of context before we get going properly. The Simpsons has now aired 803 episodes across 37 seasons. As of April 2025, it's been renewed through season 40, which means the show will still be running in the late 2020s. And at the rate things are going, it will likely reach somewhere close to 1,000 episodes before anyone decides it's done. It is the longest-running animated series in American television history, the longest-running sitcom in American television history, the longest-running scripted primetime show, full stop by a comfortable margin. And it properly started on December 17th, 1989, with a Christmas special that was only the premiere because the episode actually planned as the premiere had severe animation problems and couldn't air, which is quite a way to begin the longest-running show in television history, accidentally because the intended version fell apart at the last moment. Before the proper series, there were the shorts. The Simpsons first appeared as interstitial segments on The Tracy Ullman Show starting in April 1987. 48 of them over 2 years. Little 60 to 90-second sketches between the main show's pieces. The animation was rough and strange. Matt Groening's original characters translated into something that moved but hadn't yet found its register. Homer looked like someone had drawn him from memory after a brief description. The family was recognizable but unresolved, still becoming whatever they were going to be. Those 2 years were a kind of gestation, and then the show proper began. And for a couple of seasons it was very good but still finding its footing. And then somewhere around season 3 something clicked. And for the next 6 years, The Simpsons produced what most people who study these things, and plenty of people who don't, consider the most consistently brilliant stretch of television comedy ever made. Now, the title of this video is The Era That Saved and Destroyed The Simpsons. I want to be upfront that that's a slightly dramatic framing, and I also think it's exactly right. Not destroyed as in ruined, not destroyed as in undone everything that came before. More like this specific window of television was so extraordinarily good, so dense with quality, so culturally enormous, that it created a standard the show could never again meet. And in doing that, it created the conditions for everything that came after to feel, if you're being honest, like a very long farewell. The show saved itself from being a novelty act, from being Bart Simpson merchandise and very little else, by producing some of the finest comedy television ever made. And by producing something that good, it became too valuable to end, too financially significant to cancel, too much of an institution to change. So it kept going, decade after decade, well past when it had anything genuinely new to say, carried along by the sheer economic weight of what that 6-year window had built. Both things are true at the same time. The Golden Age made the show immortal, and it made everything after it impossible to measure up to. And that's actually fine, I think. Most remarkable things are like this. They're great, and then the greatness recedes, and the greatness doesn't disappear just because something lesser came after it. Here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with seasons 1 and 2. The rough draft years where the show was finding its legs while somehow already being watched by more people than almost anything else on television. Then we'll spend time in the writer's room because the people who built the Golden Age are genuinely fascinating and not talked about enough outside of obsessive fan communities. We'll move through the seasons themselves, the cultural explosion of the early 1990s, the specific episodes that define what this era was. And then we'll talk about what happened after. The slow drift, the economics that made the show impossible to stop, the Algene years, and what it means that you can still put any of those 150 or so episodes on right now and find them exactly as you left them. There are a couple of things I want to flag before we get going, mostly because they're useful context. The Golden Age doesn't have universally agreed upon boundaries. Some people say it starts with season 1, some with season 3, some say it ends at season 8, some say season 9, some say it never really ended and just gradually declined and it's impossible to draw a line. I'm going to use seasons 3 through 8 as my rough framework, which corresponds to the showrunner run that begins with Al Jean and Mike Rice in 1991 and ends with Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein in 1997. You can argue with the edges. Plenty of people do. But those 6 seasons are where the consensus clusters, and they're the ones we'll spend most of our time in. The other thing worth saying, I love this show, obviously. You probably do too, or you wouldn't be watching something with a runtime measured in hours about it. But loving it doesn't mean pretending the decline didn't happen, or that the show at season 35 is the same thing as the show at season 5. Part of what I find interesting about this specific period is precisely the fact that something so good could exist, and then not quite exist anymore within the lifespan of the same program. That seems worth understanding properly, not just celebrating or mourning. The title, while we're on it, is doing 2 things at once. The era saved The Simpsons by making it irreplaceable, by producing such an extraordinary run of television that the show became a permanent cultural institution. And the era destroyed The Simpsons by doing exactly that, making it so significant, so financially enormous, so embedded in the culture that it became impossible to end. The destruction isn't about the quality declining, though it did. It's about the show being trapped by its own achievement. Everything good that came after season 8 exists inside the shadow cast by those 6 seasons. Everything the show tries to be, it's already been better. That's not a comfortable thing to be, and the show has been it for going on 30 years, right? Let's start at the beginning. There's an episode in season 2 called The Way We Was. It's a flashback episode. Homer and Marge tell the story of how they met in high school in 1974. Homer is trying to get close to Marge by pretending to need tutoring in French, and the whole thing is warm and a little sad and genuinely romantic in a way that surprised people who thought they were watching a cartoon about a yellow man who said dough. It still stands up. It's one of the better episodes the show ever made. And it's from season 2, which is, by most measures, before the Golden Age had properly started. Which tells you something interesting about those early seasons. They weren't bad. They were genuinely often quite beautifully good. They just hadn't become the specific thing yet. The engine was running, but it hadn't found its gear. Season 1 ran for 13 episodes, starting with Simpsons roasting on an open fire in December 1989 and finishing in May 1990. The animation was handled by Klasky Supo, a studio that gave everything a slightly organic, hand-drawn quality. The characters were a bit lumpy, the yellows were deeper and warmer, and Homer's face had a roundness to it that he'd gradually lose as the show refined its visual style. It's not ugly, this early animation. It's just unpolished in a way that feels very human, like you can sense the people making it. I have a mild affection for it, honestly, even though the later animation is obviously more accomplished. The show moved to Thursdays from season 2 onwards, placed head-to-head against The Cosby Show on NBC, which was at the time still one of the most watched programs in America. For a fledgling fourth network to do this with a cartoon was either extremely bold or extremely reckless. Probably both. The Simpsons didn't beat The Cosby Show in total viewers for a while, but it demolished it in the demographics that mattered for advertising. Younger audiences, particularly those aged 18 to 49, and that demographic victory was what kept Fox committed to the show and gave it room to grow. It was already enormous by the standards of the time. The season 2 premiere, Bart Gets an F, which aired October 11, 1990, drew approximately 33.6 million viewers. That is, to be absolutely clear, still the most watched episode in the show's entire history. The show was famous before it was great. Bart Simpson was on backpacks and t-shirts and skateboard decks and cereal boxes before the writing had fully arrived. That's not a criticism. It just meant that when the writing did arrive, it had an enormous audience already waiting for it. Homer in these early seasons is recognizably Homer, but not quite his fully formed self. He's more of a functional cartoon dad, loving but oblivious, well-meaning but incompetent. The comedy engine that would eventually make him one of the most interesting characters in television hadn't quite found its specific rhythm yet. He's doing the steps but not the dance, if that makes sense. Bart is further along. The rebellious, charming troublemaker came quite naturally from the beginning. Lisa is already the soul of the show in certain episodes, particularly Moaning Lisa in Season 1, where her existential unhappiness is treated as real and serious rather than something to be fixed or laughed at. That emotional sincerity is the thing Seasons 1 and 2 get absolutely right. The family feels genuine. When Homer tries to be a good dad and fails, you feel for him. When Marge is lonely or overwhelmed, it registers. When Bart is kind, it means something. This emotional core, the actual love between these people, however dysfunctional the expression of it, is what makes the show worth watching at all. The Golden Age would build extraordinary comedy on top of this foundation. But the foundation was there from the start, and that matters. Sam Simon deserves a mention here, and he doesn't always get one. Simon was one of the 3 original co-creators alongside Matt Groening and James L. Brooks. He's the one who largely built the writer's room, recruited the initial writing staff, and developed the visual style and character voices during the first couple of seasons. His fingerprints are on everything that makes the show work at a structural level. The casting process, the approach to the writer's room, the way the show thought about its characters. He and Groening had a falling out that became quite bitter and ran on for years. Simon left after Season 4 and spent the rest of his life largely estranged from the show he'd helped build. He died in 2015 from cancer. It's a sad story, and it tends to get glossed over in the official version of The Simpsons history. What Seasons 1 and 2 were building, slowly with a couple of genuinely great episodes and amongst the rougher ones, was the Springfield world. The supporting characters were appearing but hadn't found their full voices. Ned Flanders was present, but just sort of blandly nice in a way that wasn't quite funny yet. Mr. Burns was a generic rich villain rather than the very specific kind of malevolence he'd become. The town was a backdrop rather than an ecosystem. That would all change. By the end of Season 2, Al Jean and Mike Rice had taken over as showrunners. The writing staff had been working together long enough to develop real chemistry, and something was about to click. You can feel it in the second half of Season 2. The jokes are tighter, the characters more defined, the Springfield world starting to fill out properly. The show was warming up. And then Season 3 began, and it stopped warming up and arrived. But I want to linger in these early seasons for a moment longer, because they have qualities that the Golden Age would expand rather than replace, and it's worth naming them clearly. Homer's Night Out from Season 1 is the episode where Homer accidentally becomes famous in Springfield after a photo of him dancing with a stripper circulates at his son's school. The comedy is gentle. The resolution involves Homer giving a speech about treating women with respect that is entirely sincere. It's an odd episode by modern standards. The sincerity sits slightly awkwardly next to the absurdity. But it's trying something genuine, and you can feel the show working out how to do it. Bart gets an F. The season 2 premiere, the one that drew those enormous numbers, is actually a fairly quiet episode at its core. Bart is failing school. He can't pass a test. He tries to study and finds he doesn't know how. He prays for snow so he gets a day off and has more time to prepare. The snow comes, he still fails. He bursts into tears in class and recites one historical fact he managed to retain, and it's enough to get him a D-. He cries with relief. Mrs. Krabappel, who has spent the episode more or less at war with him, is moved. It's a simple story, and the emotional note it ends on is completely true. That's what the show could do in its early seasons. Find the genuine feeling in a very ordinary kind of failure. Stark raving dad aside, which we've already discussed and which isn't available to watch, Season 2 also gives us Blood Feud, which is the episode where Homer donates blood to Mr. Burns expecting a generous reward and receives only a heartfelt note. Homer's fury and then his gradual coming around to the idea that the gesture itself was the thing is structurally almost exactly what the Golden Age would do with Homer constantly. He wants something obvious and material. He gets something less obvious and more human. He resists it, and then he doesn't. The template was there in Season 2. The Golden Age would perfect the execution. The Klasky Tsupo animation deserves its own small tribute here. It's often described simply as crude or unpolished, which isn't quite fair. It's organic in a way that feels specific and intentional. The slightly off-register character models, the warmer color palette, the visual style that looks like someone's drawing rather than a production pipeline. There's a handmade quality to it. The Golden Age animation under Film Roman is more accomplished and more consistent, and I prefer it, but I'd miss the Klasky Tsupo era if it were erased. It's the show in its germinal state, which has its own kind of interest. One more thing about Seasons 1 and 2 before we leave them. They introduced almost everyone who matters. Nelson Muntz appears in Season 1, Episode 5. Sideshow Bob appears in Season 1, Episode 12. Chief Wiggum has his first legitimate appearance in Season 1. Edna Krabappel, Martin Prince, Milhouse, Ralph Wiggum, Apu, Otto, all of them arriving in the first 2 seasons and then gradually finding their specific registers as the writers understood them better. The supporting cast is one of the show's most extraordinary achievements, and the Golden Age developed it rather than created it. All those characters were present from the beginning, waiting to be what they became. It's also worth noting that the emotional architecture of the Simpson family, the specific dynamic between Homer and Marge, between Homer and Bart, between Lisa and the family's collective obliviousness, was established in these early seasons with genuine care. The Way We Was tells you everything you need to know about why Homer and Marge are together. Bart the General tells you something real about Bart's anger and what it costs him. Moaning Lisa is probably the most honest thing the show ever said about what it's like to be intelligent and sensitive in a world that doesn't value either. These were the foundations. The Golden Age built an extraordinary structure on them. There's a detail about the show's first episode that I always find worth mentioning. Simpsons roasting on an open fire ends with the family adopting a racing greyhound that Homer brought home after it failed to win. The dog is named Santa's Little Helper, and he becomes part of the family from the very first episode. The whole plot is built around Homer's desperation to provide a Christmas for his family after Bart spends the Christmas bonus money on a tattoo, and Marge has to use the household savings to have it removed. Homer works as a mall Santa, earns almost nothing, bets it at the dog track, and loses, and then comes home with a dog that nobody else wanted. It's the origin story of the whole show in some ways. Homer tries his best in the wrongest possible ways and ends up giving his family something they didn't know they needed. That's Season 1. That's also the Golden Age, in miniature, 4 episodes before they'd even finished the first season. There's a fact about John Swartzwelder that I find myself thinking about more than is probably reasonable. When California passed its indoor smoking ban in the mid-1990s, Swartzwelder, who had been writing his Simpsons script sitting in a booth at his favorite diner, drinking enormous quantities of coffee and smoking cigarettes more or less continuously, solved the problem by purchasing an actual diner booth and installing it in his house. He recreated the diner at home so he could keep writing in exactly the same conditions. He gave one interview in his entire life to The New Yorker in 2021. He wrote 59 episodes of The Simpsons, more than any other writer by a margin of 21, and somehow remained almost entirely invisible while doing so. I think about this because it tells you something about the specific kind of people who built the golden age of this show. Brilliant, eccentric, operating by their own internal rules, and absolutely not interested in the performance of their own brilliance. The show got made by people who were, by most accounts, genuinely only trying to make each other laugh. The writing staff that converged on The Simpsons in the late 1980s and stayed through the first decade of the 1990s was an unusual gathering of people. There was a significant Harvard pipeline: Al Jean, Mathematics, class of 1981. Mike Rice, Conan O'Brien, Brent Forrester. Not exclusively Harvard by any means, but the Ivy League comedy writing tradition that fed places like the National Lampoon and eventually The Simpsons produced a specific kind of comedian, very smart, very literary, with a tendency toward both absurdism and emotional intelligence that isn't always what you expect from the same person. Sam Simon had recruited several of the early writers, including Swartzwelder and George Meyer, through his connection to Army Man, a short-lived underground comedy magazine that Meyer had put together. Army Man had maybe 3 issues, ran for no time at all, and was read by almost no one. It was also, apparently, extraordinarily funny. Funny enough that Simon recognized in its contributors exactly the kind of mind he was looking for. That's how Swartzwelder got to The Simpsons, through a 3-issue comedy magazine that barely existed. George Meyer is someone who deserves his own documentary. He was never a showrunner, was rarely the officially credited writer on any particular episode, and has given almost as few interviews as Swartzwelder. And yet virtually everyone who worked on the show during the Golden Age describes him as the most important single influence on what the show sounded like. He wrote or substantially rewrote more scenes than any official record would suggest. His sensibility, dark, precise, interested in the gap between what institutions claim to be and what they actually are, runs through the best years of the show like a current. George Meyer is the reason certain Simpsons jokes feel like they were written by someone who is very funny and also genuinely troubled by the world, which, from what I gather, is accurate. Al Jean and Mike Rice became showrunners for seasons 3 and 4. Jean later described his daily mental state during this period as basically just trying not to ruin something everyone already loved. He said the first episode they ran, Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington, the season 3 premiere, got 6 or 7 full rewrites because neither of them trusted their own judgment yet. They were scared, and that fear translated into extraordinary care. The episodes from seasons 3 and 4 are among the most carefully constructed half-hours of television comedy ever made. Conan O'Brien joined the writing staff in 1991 and left in 1993 when NBC offered him the late-night slot after David Letterman moved to CBS. He was 29 when he took the job, 30 when he left. His Simpsons episodes are still some of the most referenced in the show's history. New Kid on the Block, Homer Goes to College, the wraparound for Treehouse of Horror 4, and Marge vs. the Monorail, which was his last episode for the show and which he's described as his favorite thing he's ever written. We'll talk about that one properly in a bit. David Merkin came in as showrunner for seasons 5 and 6 after Jean and Rice left to create The Critic. Merkin was something of an outsider to the Harvard comedy world. His sensibility was zanier, more influenced by Looney Tunes and absurdist physical comedy. He described wanting to take the show somewhere weirder and bigger. Seasons 5 and 6 are slightly different in flavor from seasons 3 and 4. A bit looser, more willing to be silly, less interested in emotional grounding for its own sake. Somehow still magnificent. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein took over for seasons 7 and 8. They'd been writing for the show since season 3. They were fans who'd got jobs, essentially. And their tenure brought a specific self-awareness and emotional depth that felt like a conscious return to what Gene and Reese had been doing. Some of the most formally adventurous episodes in the show's history came from their seasons. 22 short films about Springfield. Homer's Enemy. You Only Move Twice. We'll get to all of those. The culture of the room was, by all accounts, intensely collaborative and intensely demanding. Every script went through communal rewrites. The principle was that every scene should carry multiple comedy tracks simultaneously. The verbal joke, the visual joke, the character joke, the background joke, all running at once without any single one announcing itself. Swartzwelder's scripts apparently needed less of this than anyone else's. His first drafts tended to arrive closer to finish than other people's. Matt Selman years later wrote that Swartzwelder was one of the greatest comedy minds of all time. He is the comedy writer whose words make the best comedy writers in the world laugh out loud. George Meyer said, "Even among comedy weirdos, he stands out. He's irreplaceable." Here's what I keep coming back to about this particular group of people. What they built was unrepeatable, specifically because of who they were, when they were there, and how they happened to find each other. The Simpsons didn't produce a great run of television because of a system or a formula. It produced a great run of television because a very specific collection of very specific people worked together for a very specific window of time. You can't reverse engineer that. You can only, when it's over, recognize what it was. There are other writers from this period worth naming because the room wasn't just the famous names. John Vitti wrote Homer Defined, Lisa's Substitute, Marge Gets a Job, Homer Goes to College, quiet, humane episodes that tend to sit near the top of any serious ranking of the show's best work. Wallace Wolodarski wrote Selma's Choice and several others, and has since made a career appearing in Wes Anderson films, which is an interesting trajectory. Jeff Martin wrote Old Money and Brush with Greatness. These writers and others like them are rarely mentioned by name, but they're the texture of the golden age, episode by episode. The Harvard comedy tradition that fed into this room is worth a brief word. Harvard has had a Lampoon, a student humor publication, since 1876, which makes it one of the oldest continuously operating comedy institutions in America. The culture it produced was specific, very smart, very literary, with an interest in absurdism that was still grounded in character and emotional logic. The Simpsons benefited enormously from this tradition, not because Harvard writers are innately superior to other comedy writers, but because the Lampoon in the 1970s and 1980s was producing a particular kind of comedy sensibility that happened to be exactly what the show needed. The dryness, the precision, the commitment to not condescending to the audience. These are Lampoon qualities, and they're Golden Age Simpsons qualities. George Meyer's Army Man magazine is one of those cultural objects that's almost impossible to find now, and would be largely unreadable to anyone who didn't already love the comedy it represented. It was a photocopied, self-distributed publication with an extremely small circulation that read like if someone had distilled the funniest parts of The Onion before The Onion existed, stripped out everything safe, and printed the residue. The humor was bleak, precise, and very strange. Sam Simon read it and recognized immediately that the people making it were exactly the kind of writers he was looking for. That's how Swartzwelder and Meyer ended up at The Simpsons, through a photocopied comedy magazine with a circulation of presumably dozens. I find this very pleasing. The process by which scripts got made in the Golden Age is also worth describing, because it's part of why the episodes have the quality they do. A writer would pitch a story and, if it was approved, write a first draft. That draft would go through a table read. Then the whole room would rewrite it. Not line notes, not suggestions, but the entire writing staff working through the script together. Swartzwelder's drafts famously needed less of this than others. His jokes tended to arrive closer to finished, which is why his scripts often retain a very specific voice even through the rewrite process. Most writers' scripts would go through 4, 5, 6 rewrites before production. Al Jean said the first season 3 episode got 6 or 7 passes. The commitment to getting it right before it got to the animators was total. You can feel it in the final product. The absence of loose ends, the density of jokes, the sense that every line has been interrogated. What this process required, above all, was a room full of people who were willing to subordinate their individual voices to the collective project. In a comedy writer's room, ego is both necessary. You need people who think their ideas are worth fighting for, and lethal if it overrides the collaborative process. The Golden Age room apparently managed this balance. Writers describe it as competitive but fundamentally supportive. You wanted your joke to survive the rewrite, but you also wanted the episode to be as good as it could be, and those instincts most of the time pointed in the same direction. Conan O'Brien's specific contribution to the room's culture is worth a note. He was the youngest writer there, and accounts from his colleagues suggest he brought an energy and a willingness to go big that was particular to his sensibility. Marge versus the monorail is the big swing made by someone who wasn't afraid of the swing. The script is, by any measure, an audacious piece of writing. A full musical number, a Bond villain parody. A premise that is completely absurd and completely committed to at the same time. You can feel the fearlessness in it. When he left, the room lost something specific. Not quality, not intelligence, but a particular quality of fearlessness. Nobody takes swings exactly like Conan took swings. The first episode of season 3 is a strange one to start with in retrospect. Stark Raving Dad, the one with Michael Jackson credited as John J. Smith, because Jackson apparently wanted the anonymity of a pseudonym while also giving a performance everyone knew was him. It aired September 19, 1991, and it ran for 28 years and won a Peabody Award and was one of those cultural moments that people remember specifically. And then in 2019, following the documentary Leaving Neverland, the Simpson family had it pulled. Matt Groening, James L. Brooks, and Al Jean made a joint statement saying they were taking it out of rotation. It's not on Disney+, it's not in syndication, it's the only episode in the show's history that officially doesn't exist anymore. I mention it because it is where season 3 begins and because its removal creates this odd gap in the chronology. There's a famous episode that started one of the best seasons in television history, and now you can't watch it in any official context. It feels like a strange wound in the archive. But let's talk about what's in it, briefly, because it matters for what the season was doing. The episode is built around Bart writing a birthday song for Lisa. Lisa, it's your birthday. We're in insurance, which is simple and sweet and absolutely in keeping with what the show was trying to be. Even the biggest, most celebrity-driven episode of the season had the family's emotional relationship at its center, now. What happened in season 3 is that the show stopped being a very good show with occasional greatness and became fairly consistently excellent. A few things converged. The animation had stabilized. Film Roman was handling production, and the characters had arrived at recognizable, consistent versions of themselves. Homer's face sharpened. The yellows became a specific yellow that felt like the show's yellow, not just a color. The visual style found its own language. The way the camera would hold on a reaction for a half beat longer than you expected. The way background gags would stack up in the corners of scenes if you were paying attention. The show started rewarding close watching in a way that earlier episodes had only occasionally managed. Springfield started breathing. That's the thing I notice most when I go back to season 3. The town feels inhabited. Ned Flanders has stopped being blandly nice and started being genuinely funny. Specifically because the show discovered that the funniest version of Ned is one who is infuriatingly sincere rather than just generically kind. Mr. Burns found his register, ancient, monstrously self-interested, occasionally baffled by the modern world, operating according to a set of values that were formed sometime in the 1890s and have never been updated. Apu, Barney, Chief Wiggum, Principal Skinner, all of them solidifying into their specific comedic selves. Homer at the Bat is one of the great Season 3 episodes, and it's remarkable partly because of what a production nightmare it apparently was. The premise: Homer joins the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant softball team and helps them reach the championship. Mr. Burns assembles a team of professional baseball ringers, 9 of them, all current major league players, to ensure the plant wins a $1 million bet. Each of the 9 players gets their own subplot. Wade Boggs gets into an argument at a pub with Barney Gumble about who the greatest prime minister of Britain was, which ends with Barney knocking him out. Roger Clemens clucks like a chicken. Steve Sachs is arrested for every unsolved crime in New York City because the police assume any New Yorker must be responsible. Coordinating all 9 real players, their schedules, their recordings, their individual storylines. It took months. The episode came out as one of the most structurally intricate things the show ever attempted. It shouldn't work, it absolutely works. Bart the murderer has Bart accidentally becoming a runner for the Springfield mob after accidentally skating into their basement bar. The mob, led by Fat Tony, Joe Mantegna, who had voiced the character on and off for decades, more or less adopts Bart. It's a loving parody of Goodfellas. The show plays it completely straight. Homer, at one point, is offered a job by Fat Tony and becomes a mob driver. And this is treated as a reasonable career development with no moral commentary whatsoever. I find this very funny. It's a specific kind of comedy. Absurdism played earnestly, as though the premise made perfect sense. Lisa gets her full emotional range properly in Season 3. The character had flashes of it in Moaning Lisa in Season 1, but in Season 3 she becomes consistent. The family's conscience and its most perceptive member, carrying a sadness that the show treats as genuine rather than as a joke setup. Like father, like clown. The episode where Krusty is estranged from his rabbi father and it's Bart and Lisa who help reconcile them is genuinely moving. It shouldn't be maybe, given that it's structured as a Jolson parody, but it is. What Season 3 signals, more than anything, is that the show knew what it was. The earlier seasons have been great in patches and uneven across episodes. Season 3 is remarkably consistent. You can watch the whole season and very rarely find yourself drifting. The batting average had improved dramatically, and it would stay there or improve further for the next 5 years. Season 4, which ran from September 1992 through May 1993, is the other half of the Al Jean and Mike Rice era, and it's possibly the most purely accomplished season the show ever produced. Camp Krusty, the premiere where Bart and Lisa go to a summer camp that turns out to be a scam run by low-grade criminals, ends with the kids staging a revolution and Krusty arriving by helicopter to apologize. It commits to its premise completely. A Streetcar Named Marge, where Marge stars in a musical version of A Streetcar Named Desire with Ned Flanders as Stanley Kowalski, should not work as an episode. It absolutely works as an episode. Homer the Heretic is Season 4, Episode 3, and it's one of the show's most serious and genuinely thoughtful episodes. Homer decides to stop going to church, stays home, has an almost spiritual experience involving football and making his own waffle batter, and develops his own personal theology. The episode doesn't mock him for this. It takes his experience seriously. God appears to him in a dream, and they have a conversation that treats Homer's spiritual instincts as legitimate, even if his conclusions are idiosyncratic. The show was capable of this, of sitting with a real question without making fun of the person asking it, and it's a quality that became rarer in the later years. Last Exit to Springfield, Season 4, Episode 17, is the one where Homer accidentally becomes union president at the nuclear plant and takes on Mr. Burns in a labor dispute. It is widely considered one of the great single episodes of the series, and with reason. It's structurally complex, emotionally layered, and contains the exchange between Homer and Burns that goes something like, Burns tells Homer he can take away everything he has, and Homer says he'll make him pay, and Burns tells him he's not afraid of Homer's gun, and Homer says he doesn't have a gun, and the both of them just stare at each other in complete mutual incomprehension. There's something in that moment, both of them operating from such different frameworks that they can't even arrive at the right misunderstanding, that captures something real about power and obliviousness. Marge versus the Monorail ends season 4's first half. It is, as discussed, the great Conan O'Brien episode. But I want to say one more thing about it here. The song. Monorail, the big production number Lyle Lanley performs in the town hall, is written and performed as though it's a real song from a real musical. Without a hint of irony, the joke is the song being so persuasive that the entire town immediately wants a monorail, but the song is also genuinely a good song. It's catchy, it's well constructed. The comedy works because the thing it's parodying is being taken seriously. The Golden Age did this constantly. The parody was never at the expense of the craft. The craft elevated the parody. The end of season 4 also marks the end of Al Jean and Mike Rice as showrunners. They left to create The Critic, which meant season 5 would begin a new era. But the transition from Jean and Rice to Merkin was, as Golden Age transitions go, remarkably smooth. Merkin had enough in common with the room's sensibility that the continuity held. Seasons 5 and 6 are different in flavor but not in quality. The show's commitment to what it was remained intact. Something I find quietly remarkable about this whole era, looking back at it, the people running the show at any given point were all, in one way or another, fans of the show. Al Jean and Mike Rice built seasons 3 and 4, partly in the tradition of what had come before them. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein got jobs as writers because they were fans who sent in their work. Everyone in the room was trying to make the show they love better. That orientation, inward toward the quality of the thing itself rather than outward, toward ratings or merchandise or institutional momentum, is visible in the episodes. They were made by people who cared about them specifically. That's rare. You notice it. In January 1992, George H.W. Bush gave a speech in which he said that America needed to be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. He was talking about family values, which was something politicians talked about quite a lot in the early 1990s. The Waltons, for anyone who needs the reference, was a wholesome drama from the 1970s about a large, good-hearted family in Depression-era Virginia. The Simpsons, presumably in Bush's reading, was the opposite of that. Chaotic, irreverent, a family where the dad strangled the son and nobody went to church with any particular sincerity. The show responded within days. An episode aired where Bart, watching the speech on television, turns to the camera and says, "We're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression too." I love this for a few reasons. One is that it's a very good joke. Another is what it tells you about where the show stood culturally in early 1992. When the sitting president of the United States names your cartoon in a speech about national values, even as a negative example, you have achieved a level of cultural presence that is genuinely difficult to describe. The Simpsons wasn't just popular, it was present in the way that only a very few things are present. It was in the conversation about what America was and wasn't, which is an extraordinary place for a cartoon about a yellow family in an unnamed state to find itself. The merchandise was everywhere. By 1990, before the Golden Age had even properly begun, there were reportedly over 500 licensed Simpsons products. Bart Simpson was on backpacks and skateboard decks and lunchboxes and beach towels and pajamas. "Don't have a cow, man." entered genuine vernacular for a while, which in retrospect feels like a very 1991 thing to have happened. The show had been merchandised before it was 3 seasons old, which is quite unusual. Most shows build an audience and then get merchandised. The Simpsons got merchandised almost simultaneously with its first season airing because Fox saw the cultural wave building and moved fast. This created a slightly odd dynamic. The show's cultural footprint during the merchandise era, 1990-1991, was partly driven by Bart as a character, specifically his anti-authority energy, which sat well on t-shirts. But the show itself was already doing something more interesting and more complex than Bart's catchphrases suggested. The gap between Bart Simpson on a skateboard as a cultural icon and what was actually on screen episode to episode was significant. The show was smarter than its own merchandise. That's not always the case. The relationship between The Simpsons and Fox during this period is worth understanding because it shapes everything that comes later. Fox had launched in 1986 as the 4th American broadcast network, and for the first few years it was genuinely uncertain whether it would survive. The Simpsons premiered at a moment when Fox needed it desperately. The show delivered in ratings, in cultural attention, in advertising revenue, at a scale that kept the network financially viable through its early years. Fox owed The Simpsons its continued existence. By the time the golden age was in full swing, that debt had created a relationship where the show had unusual creative freedom precisely because the network was afraid to interfere with the thing that was keeping it alive. This is also, as we'll get to later, one of the mechanisms by which the show became impossible to cancel. But that's a later problem. For now, in 1993 and 1994, the Freedom was producing extraordinary television. The guest stars in this era are worth talking about briefly because they function differently from how celebrity cameos function now. A guest appearance on The Simpsons in the early 1990s was a cultural event, not because the stars were necessarily bigger, they were obviously very famous people, but because the show's standing was such that appearing on it meant something. Paul McCartney agreed to appear in Season 7's Lisa the Vegetarian, Season 7, Episode 5, October 15th, 1995, on one condition: that Lisa remained vegetarian in all future episodes of the show. The producers agreed, and she has been in every subsequent episode for 30 years. McCartney made his appearance contingent on a permanent character change, and the show accepted. That's how seriously both sides were taking it. Elizabeth Taylor voiced Maggie's first word, Daddy, in a Season 4 episode. Johnny Cash showed up as a coyote spirit guide in a Season 8 vision sequence. These aren't stunt castings. They're the show and its cultural moment meeting each other and both treating the encounter as significant. There was also this. The show was saying things about American life that live-action network television couldn't easily say. Not because live-action TV was technically censored, but because animation creates a distance. You can have Homer work for a man who is almost cartoonishly evil, literally an animated cartoon figure of evil, and address the relationship between labor and capital in ways that a live-action drama would have to approach much more carefully. You can have a show set in a community shaped by nuclear power and ecological negligence without it becoming a message episode, because the comedy absorbs the critique. Springfield is a satire of American middle-class life, but it's also just where these people live, and the two things coexist without rubbing against each other. The very specific balance the show maintained in this era, smart enough that intelligent people felt proud to love it, accessible enough that essentially everyone could watch it, is a very small target window. Most things that achieve genuine mass popularity do it by smoothing down the edges that would alienate people. The Golden Age Simpsons kept its edges, it just made them funny enough that you didn't feel their sharpness until later. There's a thing that happens to very popular things eventually, where the popularity starts to work against the quality. The merchandise association, the cultural ubiquity, the sense that the thing is everywhere. These create a feedback loop where the thing starts to seem less like art and more like a phenomenon, and phenomena get taken less seriously by the people who take art seriously. The Golden Age Simpsons navigated this remarkably well for a long time. The show was on every t-shirt and in every speech and on the cover of every magazine, and it was also genuinely making some of the most carefully constructed television of the decade. Both things were true simultaneously and didn't undermine each other. That's an unusual achievement. There was also a generosity in the show's relationship to its audience during this period that I don't want to understate. The show respected viewers enough to trust them with things that were difficult or uncomfortable. Homer's phobia trusted viewers to follow an episode about homophobia to a conclusion that didn't moralize. Bart sells his soul trusted viewers to take a child's spiritual anxiety seriously. Homer the heretic trusted viewers to sit with genuine theological uncertainty without resolving it. A show with a more anxious relationship to its audience would have hedged these. The Golden Age Simpsons didn't hedge, it committed, and the audience committed back. The cultural moment the show inhabited in the early to mid-1990s is genuinely irreproducible. Not just because the show won't be that good again, but because the conditions that made it possible. A pre-internet media landscape where a single show could dominate national conversation, a Fox network that was betting its existence on the program, a specific generation of comedy writers in the same room at exactly the right moment in their careers, are conditions that simply no longer exist. The show was particular in every sense. It was this show made by these people, watched by this many people at this moment. And the fact that the Golden Age episodes are still available and still good doesn't diminish how specific the original context was. There's an FXX marathon from 2014 that illustrates something about what the show had become. In August of that year, FXX ran a 12-day, 552-episode marathon called Every Simpsons Ever. Every episode back-to-back, around the clock for 12 days. It was the longest continuous television marathon in history at the time, and it was the highest-rated broadcast in FXX's history. Millions of people watched it. The cultural appetite for the show, its continued availability as a comfort object, as background television, as something to return to, had not diminished despite the show's creative peak being 20 years in the past. That marathon wasn't successful because the new episodes were good. It was successful because the old ones still were, and because people wanted to be back in the Springfield of 1993 in the way you want to go back somewhere you were happy. The show's relationship with politics in this era extended beyond the Bush response, though that's the most famous moment. Springfield was consistently drawn as a community with recognizable American political dysfunctions. Mayor Quimby as a Kennedy parody, obviously, but also the show's ongoing treatment of local government as a system that exists primarily to benefit its participants at the expense of its citizens. Mr. Burns manipulating elections, buying favors, treating Springfield as his personal estate. The police as an institution that functions as comedy rather than as protection. These things were funny, and they were also commentary, and the show never felt the need to announce which it was doing at any given moment. The political material and the comedy were the same material. Who Shot Mr. Burns aired across seasons 6 and 7. The Cliffhanger in May 1995. The Resolution in September 1995. And it was a genuine cultural event in a way that seems almost impossible now. People submitted guesses, there were billboards. The Resolution made the cover of magazines. A cartoon cliffhanger was treated with the same seriousness as a major live-action drama. That's a statement about where the show stood in mid-1990s American culture. It was the show everyone was watching, and everyone had a theory. And the summer in between the two parts was a kind of shared anticipation that the internet hadn't yet replaced with immediate resolution. You had to wait. Everyone had to wait. And then in September, you found out together. The show also had this genuine compositional density in its visual jokes. The Golden Age episodes, particularly in the film Roman era from season 4 onwards, are full of things happening in the background, on signs and passing, a shop called Pre-Owned Cars, No Known Curse, a gravestone that reads, Svengali, we hardly knew ye except you were cheap. The audience was rewarded for paying close attention without being made to feel they'd missed anything if they didn't. That generosity, jokes for the attentive that aren't withheld from the inattentive, is a very specific quality that the show's writers clearly cared about, and that the animators, to their enormous credit, translated faithfully. There are episodes of this show I've seen 40 times. I know the dialogue before the character speaks it. I know which visual gags are in the corners of certain scenes. I know the specific timing of specific beats. And I still watch them again, not because I've forgotten them, but because there's a pleasure in the specific execution that doesn't really diminish with familiarity. It's a bit like listening to a song you love. You know what's coming, but the coming of it is still the thing. I want to just wander through some of these for a while. Not a ranked list, not a countdown, just some episodes from seasons 4 through 8 that I find myself returning to, with whatever observations feel worth making about them. We'll move at our own pace. Marge versus the Monorail. Season 4, Episode 12, January 14th, 1993. Conan O'Brien's script, his last episode for the show since he'd left for late night that same year. The premise is borrowed from The Music Man, the 1957 musical about a traveling con artist who sells a town on a marching band they don't need and can't fund. In this version, a smooth-talking salesman named Lyle Lanley, Phil Hartman, who was genuinely brilliant in everything he did for this show, arrives in Springfield just as the town receives a $3 million settlement for Mr. Burns illegally dumping his nuclear waste. Lanley suggests spending the money on a monorail. He has a song. Springfield wants a monorail. The episode is structured almost perfectly. Lanley's introduction and the song, which absolutely commits to being a song, no ironic distance, fully performed, takes the first act. The rest of the episode is the consequences of Springfield's collective credulity. The monorail, built to Lanley's cutting corner specifications, goes out of control on its maiden voyage with Homer as the driver. Leonard Nimoy, who has turned up as a guest for reasons that are never entirely explained, is largely useless in the crisis. Homer's solution involves an anchor and a giant donut. It works in the way things work in Springfield. What makes this episode special beyond its jokes, and the jokes are very good, is its structure. It's an episode that is entirely committed to its own absurdity. It never winks at you. It never steps outside itself to acknowledge that it's ridiculous. Lanley's song is performed as though it's a real song from a real musical, because within the logic of this episode, it is. That total commitment to premise is something the best Simpsons episodes share, and it's harder to achieve than it looks. Homer's Barbershop Quartet, Season 5, Episode 1, September 30th, 1993. This one is structured as a Beatles parody. Homer, Apu, Barney, and Chief Wiggum form a barbershop quartet called the B-Sharps, become briefly and enormously famous, then fall apart, as the Beatles did, but much faster and for different reasons. The episode is told in flashback, with Bart and Lisa discovering their father's Grammy at a garage sale and asking what happened. What I love about this episode is its emotional register, which is something the first season opener of any show rarely manages. Underneath the Beatles jokes, and they're good, the Yoko figure, the rooftop concert, there's this quiet melancholy about Homer having done something remarkable before Bart and Lisa knew him. He was part of something. It was briefly wonderful. And now it's at a garage sale for 75 cents. The episode ends with Homer and his old bandmates on the roof of Moe's Tavern playing one last concert to an audience of about 6 people, including a passing George Harrison, who says, "It's been done," and walks off. Homer's happy about it anyway. There's something genuinely moving about that. Cape Fear, Season 5, Episode 2, October 7th, 1993. Sideshow, Bob returns to threaten Bart. The family goes into witness protection, and eventually Sideshow Bob corners Bart on a houseboat and is forced to perform the entirety of the HMS Pinafore in order to stall for time because he can't resist an appreciative audience. But the real thing about Cape Fear is the rake sequence. Sideshow Bob, walking across a yard, steps on a rake. The handle swings up and hits him in the face. He steps on another rake, another hit in the face. He steps on another one. The sequence continues. It goes on for far longer than any joke is supposed to go on, and then it goes on longer than that. At some point, and I've tried to work out exactly when this happens, it stops being a joke in the conventional sense and becomes something closer to meditation, a pure, repeating thing. The 19th rake is funnier than the first one. I find this almost impossible to explain and completely true. Homer Loves Flanders, Season 5, Episode 16, March 17, 1994. This is the episode where Homer, desperate for tickets to a football game, ends up benefiting from Ned Flanders' generosity and then decides, genuinely without ulterior motive, that he loves Ned Flanders and wants to be his best friend. The twist that makes the episode something more than a comedy of errors is this. Ned can't handle it. Homer's affection is constant and overwhelming, and Ned, who has spent years being a good neighbor to a man who regularly dismisses or ignores him, finds that being wanted by Homer is its own kind of exhausting. He eventually tries to pull away, which is when the episode quietly points out that Ned is capable of the same smallness he'd previously been above. It's surprisingly human for what is nominally a comedy about a man being too friendly. 22 short films about Springfield. Season 7, Episode 21, April 14th, 1996. No A-plot, no Homer as the engine. 22 brief vignettes about Springfield residents. Apu's lunch break, snake robbing Sideshow Bob, Principal Skinner, and Superintendent Chalmers attempting to recover from a catastrophic dinner involving a fire in some aurora borealis, all nominally happening simultaneously on the same afternoon. The episode is an acknowledgement that Springfield had, by Season 7, become a fully inhabited world. The town had enough residents with enough specificity that you could spend 22 minutes doing short films about peripheral characters and the audience would follow it. The Steamed Hams sketch, Skinner and Chalmers' Dinner Misadventure, has developed a second life on the internet that neither the writers nor the internet can entirely account for. I've seen dozens of remixes and parodies of it at this point. Something about the specific rhythm of Skinner's increasingly desperate excuses resonates with people in ways that are hard to articulate. It's become a kind of shared cultural language for a certain generation of internet users, which is quite a lot of weight for a 4-minute sketch about someone lying about where his food is from. You Only Move Twice, Season 8, Episode 2, November 3rd, 1996. Albert Brooks as Hank Scorpio, a supervillain who is also simultaneously the best boss Homer has ever had. The episode is structured as a James Bond parody, with Scorpio serving as the Bond villain who is conquering a stretch of the eastern seaboard. Homer doesn't notice any of this because Scorpio is genuinely kind to him, encourages him, remembers his name, runs alongside him, and asks about his hamstring. The Simpson family moves to a beautiful planned community called Cypress Creek, where everything is perfect except that Homer's family is completely miserable. Marge has no purpose because the house runs itself. Lisa is allergic to the local flora. Bart is put in a remedial class. Only Homer is thriving. At the end, Homer quits to go back to Springfield. Scorpio, in a parting gift, gives Homer the Denver Broncos. Homer wanted the Dallas Cowboys. He doesn't say this. The episode ends. Scorpio goes back to taking over the East Coast. The structural thing this episode is doing, Homer finally finding a situation where he genuinely succeeds, and the cost of that success being his family's unhappiness, is exactly the kind of thing the Golden Age did constantly and almost invisibly. The comedy is in the foreground. The emotional observation is just underneath it. You absorb both at once. Homer's enemy is coming up in the next section, so I'll save that one. But I want to note here that it's currently the highest rated episode in the show's history on IMDb, 9.3 out of 10 as of any time I've checked. It was aired on May 4th, 1997. It's been 28 years and it hasn't been displaced. That's something. The structural thing that unites these episodes, and it's worth making explicit, is something fans sometimes call the Act 2 pivot. In the Golden Age, episodes would frequently spend their first act establishing a premise, and then, at some point in the middle, the premise would completely transform into something else. Homer's Barbershop Quartet is nominally about Homer being in a barbershop quartet. What it's actually about is memory and time, and what it means to have had a period of your life that your children will never see. Cape Fear is nominally about Sideshow Bob threatening Bart. What it becomes, for a while, is a meditation on repetition. The show trusted its audience enough to make those pivots without announcing them. The emotional sincerity underneath everything is the other thing. Even in the most absurdist episodes, Monorail, Bond Villain, 22 short films, there is something real at the bottom, something about family or longing or the small defeats and unexpected kindnesses that make up an ordinary life. The comedy is never just jokes, it's jokes doing something else at the same time. There are a few more episodes I want to mention before we move on because we've spent a lot of time in the big set pieces and some of the quieter ones deserve their due. Bart Sells His Soul is Season 7, Episode 4, and it's an episode that takes a genuinely theological question seriously while also being extremely funny about it. Bart, believing souls are a primitive concept and not real, sells his to Milhouse for $5. He then starts to notice that nothing is funny anymore, that he can't feel joy, that automatic doors don't open for him. The episode ends with Bart praying, genuinely in a dark church, asking for his soul back. Lisa, who secretly bought it back from the chain of transactions it had passed through, slides it under his door. It's an episode that sits with you for a while after. The soul, whatever it is, matters to Bart. And the episode doesn't tell you whether the soul is a real thing or a metaphor or a story people tell themselves. It just trusts you to feel the weight of Bart not having it. Lisa's substitute from Season 2. And yes, this is technically pre-Golden Age, but it belongs here in any discussion of what the show was capable of. Lisa's teacher, Mr. Bergstrom, voiced by Dustin Hoffman under a pseudonym, understands Lisa in a way that almost no adult in her life manages. When he leaves, he's a substitute he was always going to leave. He hands her a note she later reads. It says, "You are Lisa Simpson." That's the whole note. That's the ending. The show lets it land without comment. It's one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show's history, and it's in Season 2. Homer's Phobia is Season 8, Episode 15, February 16th, 1997, and it's the episode where Homer befriends a gay antiques dealer named John, voiced by John Waters, and then becomes worried that Bart might be gay and goes on a series of increasingly misguided attempts to butch him up. The episode won a GLAAD Media Award. More importantly, it's funny and warm, and deals with Homer's prejudice as something he can move past through actual experience with an actual person, which is the simplest possible description of how prejudice is defeated in the real world. John Waters' performance is one of the great one-episode guest turns in the show's history. He plays John as someone who finds Homer's obliviousness mostly amusing, which is the right read. The Springfield Files is Season 8, Episode 10, and it's the X-Files crossover. Mulder and Scully, David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, come to Springfield to investigate a Homer alien sighting. It's lighter than most of what we've talked about, more of a genre parody than an emotionally grounded episode, but it has a specific energy and confidence that marks it as late Golden Age. The show knew how to do everything at this point. It could do the Beatles parody and the theological meditation and the labor dispute and the X-Files crossover, and all of them were recognizably the same show. That range is unusual. Most shows, even very good ones, find their register and stay in it. The Treehouse of Horror episodes deserve a mention here too, even though they sit slightly outside the main continuity. The annual Halloween anthology had been running since Season 2, Treehouse of Horror 1 through Treehouse of Horror 8, by the end of Season 8. And they are, as a collection, some of the most formally inventive things the show ever made. The horror parody format gave the writers permission to kill characters, visit genuinely dark places, and experiment structurally in ways the main episodes couldn't. The Shining, the Kubrick parody from Treehouse of Horror 5, is sharper as a Kubrick parody than many actual reviews of the film. Time and Punishment from the same episode, where Homer keeps accidentally altering history with a broken toaster, has a specific rhythm that is its own thing, not really a parody of anything, just a piece of surrealist comedy with a forward momentum like a roller coaster. The Treehouse episodes are their own subgenre within the Golden Age, and they're wonderful. I keep coming back to this one episode. It aired May 4th, 1997, and I'm still not entirely sure what it's doing. Or rather, I think I know what it's doing, and it's something the show was only going to be able to do once, and it did it here, at the very end of the Golden Age, like it knew. Homer's Enemy. Season 8, Episode 23. Written by John Swartzwelder, directed by Jim Reardon. The premise is simple. A man named Frank Grimes is hired at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Frank Grimes had a difficult life. He was abandoned by his parents at age 4. He worked to put himself through school. He got a degree in nuclear physics despite having no institutional support, no family money, nothing but his own effort. He got a job at the plant as a result of genuine merit. He is, by any conventional measure, a person who deserves good things. Homer Simpson notices none of this because Homer Simpson doesn't think in those terms. Frank Grimes quickly becomes consumed by the unfairness of Homer's situation. Homer has a beautiful house, far nicer than Grimes' apartment, a loving wife, 3 children who appear to adore him. He's been to space. Season 5, the one where he becomes an astronaut, which Grimes discovers from a framed photo on Homer's desk. He has had dinner with Gerald Ford. He is, objectively, by any measure of outcomes, a success. And he's also someone who almost caused a nuclear meltdown on his first day, who regularly falls asleep at his station, who causes such consistent chaos that his colleagues have simply integrated the chaos into their expectations of him. Grimes tries to expose Homer as a fraud. He succeeds. He arranges a children's nuclear power plant design competition and enters Homer as a joke, expecting Homer to humiliate himself. Homer wins, the crowd applauds, Grimes snaps. He begins doing Homer things, grabbing food without paying, walking through restricted areas without gloves, shouting, "I'll act like Homer Simpson and see how long it takes before I am showered with rewards." He grabs live electrical wires. He dies. At the funeral, Homer falls asleep in the pew. In his sleep, he shouts, "Change the channel, Marge." The mourners laugh. This episode is uncomfortable in a way that most Simpsons episodes carefully avoid being. The show is asking, directly and without its usual cushioning, whether Homer deserves what he has. The answer Frank Grimes provides is no. Absolutely not. Homer is rewarded for incompetence and obliviousness at every turn, while a man who did everything correctly gets nothing. And the show doesn't resolve this. The episode doesn't end with Homer learning a lesson or Grimes discovering some hidden dignity in failure. Grimes dies. Homer sleeps. The town laughs. There are people who read this as a commentary on the show itself, specifically on a Homer who had started to drift from lovable idiot toward something more cartoonishly unkind. The theory being that Grimes represents the part of the audience asking why Homer keeps getting rewarded, and that the show's answer is a kind of shrug. Because that's how this place works. Because Groening always said Homer was meant to represent the part of us that wants to do nothing and get everything. Because in Springfield, the social contract is not what it is in the real world. I think that reading is partly right. But I also think Homer's enemy is something stranger and more interesting than just meta commentary. It's a genuinely dark episode. The darkness isn't comic darkness. It's not Burns' darkness or Moe darkness, which are safely contained by their cartoon exaggeration. Frank Grimes's darkness is recognizable. He's a real kind of person. His grievance is a real kind of grievance. And the show kills him for it, and the town laughs, and the episode ends. The episode aired in season 8. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein's last season as showrunners. The last season of the Golden Age by most accounts. Within a few months, Mike Scully would take over, and Homer would begin the very gradual process of becoming a different kind of character. Less lovably oblivious, more actively thoughtless. Less someone stumbling through situations he doesn't understand. More someone whose defining quality is an aggressive absence of consideration for others. Homer's enemy watches differently knowing that. It reads now like the show looking at what Homer was becoming, putting that version of Homer in a room with someone whose life it had ruined, and filming the result. Not as a warning exactly, more as a record. Here's what this character is. Here is the honest cost of it. We're putting it on film before the door closes. The door closed the following season. I want to dwell on the episode a bit longer because there's a subplot that usually gets less attention than the Grimes material, and it's doing something quietly interesting. In the B story, Bart buys a disused factory for $1. He tries to run it as a business and loses money continuously. The factory floods. He burns through his resources. He closes it. The subplot exists mostly as a parody of industrial decline and the naive optimism of the would-be entrepreneur. But it also mirrors the A story in a small way. Bart, like Homer, stumbles into a situation without adequate preparation, makes a mess of it, and faces no lasting consequences. He's fine at the end. Whereas Grimes, who prepared for everything, who earned every qualification, is dead. The episode doesn't make this parallel explicit. It doesn't need to. You feel it in the structural arrangement. The two stories sitting next to each other. One about earned failure with no consequence, and one about unearned success with catastrophic consequence. Swartzwelder was one of the best structure writers the show ever had, and you can see it in how Homer's enemy is assembled. Homer's characterization in this episode is worth being specific about, because it represents a particular version of Homer. The oblivious one rather than the malicious one. He doesn't understand why Grimes dislikes him. He genuinely tries to befriend Grimes and is hurt when the attempts fail. He shows Grimes his astronaut photo not to brag, but because he thinks Grimes would find it interesting. Homer is not in this episode being deliberately unkind. He simply cannot comprehend that his existence might be an affront. That version of Homer, lovable, oblivious, genuinely warm-hearted, but catastrophically unaware, is the Golden Age Homer. It's the version the show would partially abandon in the seasons that followed, which is part of why this episode, at the end of the Golden Age, registers as a kind of farewell to that characterization. Here is Homer at his most Homer. And the show is honest about what that costs someone who has to live next to it. A few other things about Homer's enemy that are worth sitting with. The title is curious. Homer's enemy. Singular, specific, as though Homer, a man who has caused enormous collateral damage across 8 seasons, has had only one true enemy. Not Mr. Burns, who has tried to kill him. Not Sideshow Bob, who was trying to kill Bart. Not the various forces of the universe that have conspired against him and been overcome through luck and stubbornness. Frank Grimes, a man who started as a potential friend and became an enemy specifically because he was paying attention to reality. The title frames Grimes as the antagonist, which is one of the episode's darkest jokes. In this universe, the person who sees clearly is the enemy. There's also the question of what the episode says about Springfield as a place. In the Golden Age, Springfield is generally presented as an absurd community that nonetheless functions. People care about each other, the town has civic life, there are institutions that work despite being staffed by idiots. Homer's enemy presents Springfield as a place that is actively hostile to people who take it seriously. Grimes takes the nuclear plant seriously and nearly loses his mind. Grimes takes Homer seriously as a problem to be exposed, and it kills him. Springfield rewards obliviousness and punishes earnestness. The episode frames this as comedy, but it's quite dark comedy, and unlike most dark comedy in the Golden Age, it doesn't provide a compensating warmth at the end. It just ends. Frank Grimes is dead, Homer is fine. That lack of resolution is what makes the episode feel like an ending rather than just an episode. Most Simpsons episodes resolve into something, a reconciliation, a lesson, a moment of unexpected grace. Homer's enemy doesn't. It ends on the laughing mourners, which is Springfield's judgment on Frank Grimes. His death is funny to us, the way everything is funny to us, because we are Springfield and Springfield finds everything funny. The show was capable of this kind of self-implication, not often, but here, completely. Something I find genuinely moving about the Golden Age, if I'm being honest, is how many of the people who made it went on to make other remarkable things. The Simpsons had become the most prestigious comedy writing job in television, which meant it drew the best comedy writers available. And it functioned for many of them as a launch pad. They came, did some of the finest work of their lives, and then left to do other things. The talent pipeline that built the Golden Age was also, inevitably, the thing that dismantled it. When those writers were ready to move on, to run their own shows, write films, do other things with what The Simpsons had taught them, they had an extraordinary amount to offer everywhere else they went. Conan O'Brien left in 1993 after season 4. He was 29, had been writing for the show for 2 seasons, and had just been offered David Letterman's late-night slot on NBC. His Simpsons episodes, New Kid on the Block, Marge versus the Monorail, Homer Goes to College, the wraparounds for Treehouse of Horror 4, remain among the most frequently cited in the show's history. He didn't leave because the show was declining. He left because NBC made him an offer he couldn't refuse, at exactly the moment The Simpsons was still at its absolute peak. That timing is part of what makes it bittersweet to think about. Al Jean and Mike Rice left after season 4 to create The Critic, an animated series about a pompous New York film critic voiced by John Lovitz. The Critic ran for 2 seasons, got canceled, developed a modest cult following, and is genuinely worth watching if you haven't. Jean eventually came back. Rice largely didn't. Greg Daniels left in the mid-90s and went on to adapt The Office for American television and to create Parks and Recreation. David X. Cohen left and went to work with Matt Groening on Futurama. The writers who came through The Simpsons' Golden Age generated, collectively, some of the most significant television of the next 2 decades. David Merkin's handoff to Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein after season 6 was smooth. Oakley and Weinstein had been in the room since season 3 and were essentially Golden Age natives. They understood what the show was supposed to feel like from the inside. Seasons 7 and 8 under them are, if anything, slightly more formally ambitious than what came before. 22 short films about Springfield is a season 7 structural experiment. Homer's Enemy is a season 8 tonal experiment. They knew what they had and spent their 2 seasons pushing at its edges. And then Mike Scully took over at the start of season 9 in 1997. This is where it becomes genuinely complicated to talk about, because Mike Scully is not a villain in this story. He's an extremely capable writer who had been producing very good Simpsons episodes since season 5. Lisa on Ice, Marge Be Not Proud, both legitimate Golden Age entries. He won 3 Emmy Awards as showrunner. His average viewership during his tenure was around 10 million an episode. which was higher than any previous showrunner's average. By the metrics the industry actually uses to measure success, his era was a success. But when Scully stepped up to showrunner, he inherited a room that had just lost Oakley and Weinstein, and before them Merkin, and before them Gene and Race, and with each departure, the institutional memory of what the show was supposed to feel like had thinned a little. And the specific shift that people notice, Homer's characterization, happened gradually enough that you couldn't point to a single episode and say, here is where he changed. It was more like a drift. The shorthand for what happened is jerk-ass Homer, which refers to the version of Homer who begins appearing more consistently in seasons 10 and 11. Still stupid, still chaotic, but now actively self-interested in ways that read as mean rather than oblivious. The Golden Age Homer was catastrophically stupid but genuinely loving. His disasters came from incomprehension, not indifference. He didn't know he was failing, and that not knowing was what made him sympathetic. The later Homer knows. He just doesn't care. That's a different character, and it doesn't behave the same way in an emotional scene, and the show stopped being able to do emotional scenes properly for a while as a result. Chris Suellentrop, writing for Slate in 2003, put it in a way I've always thought was precisely right. Under Scully's tenure, The Simpsons became, well, a cartoon. Episodes that once would have ended with Homer and Marge bicycling into the sunset now end with Homer blowing a tranquilizer dart into Marge's neck. That's a good summary of the change. The show abandoned the emotional sincerity that had been its foundation without quite realizing what it was giving up. There's also this. In season 8, Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein aired an episode called The Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show, which is about a struggling cartoon adding a new, audience-tested character, a dog named Poochie, voiced by Homer, to boost ratings and how the character fails spectacularly and becomes despised. The episode is a direct satire of the practice of focus group testing new characters into existing shows when the original formula stops working. It aired in February 1997. 6 months before the era of the show it was satirizing began. Oakley and Weinstein were mocking something that was about to happen to their own show from the inside. While they still had the keys, I don't know if they knew. I prefer to think they knew. John Ortved, who wrote an unauthorized history of The Simpsons in 2009, described Scully's tenure this way. Scully's episodes excel when compared to what The Simpsons airs nowadays, but he was the man at the helm when the ship turned towards the iceberg. Which is a good formulation. The ship didn't hit the iceberg on Scully's watch. It just stopped sailing in the right direction, and by the time anyone noticed the iceberg, the course correction required was larger than anyone managed. A note on what jerk-ass Homer actually looks like in practice, because it's easy to describe the concept and harder to pin down in specific episodes. In season 10, 1998 to 99, there are episodes where Homer does things the Golden Age Homer simply wouldn't do. Not out of lovable obliviousness, but out of an aggression that the earlier characterization didn't have. He manipulates people more deliberately. His humor becomes cruel rather than accidentally harmful. The emotional resolutions that the Golden Age depended on, Homer realizing he was wrong, or trying hard and failing, or stumbling into a genuine moment of connection, became rarer, and when they did appear, they felt imposed rather than earned. The flip side of this is that certain individual season 9 and 10 episodes are perfectly good. Realty Bites is a season 9 episode that works. Das Bus works, even in the Scully era. The institutional knowledge of what a good Simpsons episode was hadn't entirely disappeared. It had thinned, and the batting average had declined, but there were still writers in the room who knew how to do it. The show didn't fall off a cliff. It stepped down a staircase, one riser at a time, and the individual steps were small enough that you could convince yourself at each one that it wasn't really declining. What you lose when you lose the emotional sincerity is hard to replace. and it's what distinguishes the good individual episodes of the Scully era from the Golden Age overall. A good Scully era episode is funny. A great Golden Age episode is funny and means something. The meaning doesn't have to be heavy or announced. In Homer's Barbershop Quartet, it's as light as a single note of melancholy at the very end. But it's there, and it matters, and its absence in the later seasons is felt, even when you can't name it precisely. Something worth noting about seasons 7 and 8 under Oakley and Weinstein: they were the most formally adventurous of the Golden Age. 22 short films about Springfield isn't just a good episode, it's an experiment in form that no previous season would have attempted. Treehouse of Horror 7 in Season 8 features a story about Bart and Lisa's conjoined twin, Hugo, locked in the attic. That is darker and stranger than most horror films aimed at adults. The final story in that episode involves Kang and Kodos running for president and winning, which in 1996 felt like broad absurdist satire and in subsequent decades has taken on a slightly different texture. Oakley and Weinstein were willing to push at what the show could be, formally and tonally, in ways that required a room that was absolutely confident in what it was doing. That confidence doesn't survive the loss of the people who built it. One more thing about the transition that I find interesting. The Scully era did produce one episode that is widely considered a genuine classic, Behind the Laughter from Season 11, a mock behind-the-music documentary about the Simpson family's rise and fall as a television phenomenon is clever, well-constructed, and self-aware in a way that the era around it mostly wasn't. Scully co-wrote it. It suggests that the ability to make something genuinely good was still present. It just wasn't reliably called upon. And that's perhaps the most frustrating thing about creative decline in long-running shows. It's rarely a complete loss. The capacity for quality persists. The consistency doesn't. There's also the matter of the characters other than Homer. One of the more under-noticed costs of the drift away from emotional sincerity was what it did to Marge. In the Golden Age, Marge was a complex character, loving, occasionally repressed, carrying the practical weight of the family's functioning, while also having genuine feelings about being undervalued. Episodes like Marge Gets a Job, Season 4, where she takes a position at the nuclear plant and has to navigate sexual harassment from Mr. Burns, treated her as a fully formed person navigating real, if cartoonized, situations. The later seasons, more interested in Homer's chaos than in any other family member's interiority, thinned Marge down to a functional role. The same happened gradually to Bart and Lisa. The Golden Age treated all four Simpsons as equally interesting. The Scully era and beyond progressively narrowed the show's interest toward Homer's mayhem, which made the rest of the family supporting cast in their own program. Here's something that doesn't get talked about much in discussions of The Simpsons' decline, partly because it's less interesting than creative arguments about character and writing, but which I think actually explains more about the show's trajectory than anything else: the economics. Fox was a struggling fourth network when The Simpsons premiered in 1989. Not financially secure, not culturally established, running on smaller budgets and second-tier affiliates and a deficit of credibility compared to the big three. The Simpsons was one of the primary reasons Fox survived its early years. The show delivered ratings, advertising revenue, and cultural legitimacy at a moment when Fox needed all three. By the mid-1990s, the network had stabilized. Other shows had arrived, the Fox brand had established itself. But The Simpsons remained central to that stability in a way that created a dependency that ran in both directions. The show needed Fox's protection, and Fox, crucially, had given the show's production company, Gracie Films, unusual creative control from the beginning, partly because the network didn't fully know what it had, and partly because the show kept delivering. But Fox also needed The Simpsons in a way that gradually made cancellation impossible to even seriously consider. When you are financially dependent on a show at that scale, you don't cancel it because the writing isn't as sharp as it was in 1994. You keep it going, you negotiate with the cast, You find a way to make the numbers work. The voice cast negotiations are worth a moment because they reveal something honest about the economics. The first major dispute came in 1998. The cast, having watched the show become one of the most profitable properties in television, sought substantial pay increases and got them, which seems entirely fair given what the show had earned. Another round in 2004. By 2011, the 6 main cast members, Dan Castellaneta, Julie Kavner, Nancy Cartwright, Yeardley Smith, Harry Shearer, and Hank Azaria, were each earning approximately $400,000 per episode, which is a lot of money. But the show had generated an estimated $13 billion in merchandise and licensing revenue by that point, so I don't begrudge any of them a penny. What matters here isn't the fairness of the salaries. It's what they tell you about the structural reality. That's around $2.4 million per episode in voice performance alone, before writing, animation, music, producing, or overseas production subcontracting. In 2011, Fox said the cost structure was untenable and the show might be canceled. The cast took pay cuts. The show continued. I don't say any of this to suggest that the actors were wrong to negotiate. They were completely correct. The show had generated an estimated $13 billion in merchandise and licensing revenue alone by that point, and the people most responsible for its success were being paid a small fraction of that. The point isn't about right and wrong. The point is what this economic reality tells you about the show's situation. Once you have a cast earning at that level, production infrastructure to match, merchandise licensing engines that depend on the character's continued cultural presence, and a theme park presence, you don't cancel it. The inertia is too great. The financial structure has taken on a life of its own. The show became too large to stop. The Simpsons movie, released July 27, 2007, made approximately $527 million worldwide against a budget of around $75 million. It was a genuine creative and commercial success. Tight in ways the show hadn't been for years, funny in ways that reminded people what the show was capable of. And it felt, watching it, like confirmation that the show had something left when given the room and the resources and the time, which was both exciting and quietly frustrating because the movie proved the quality was still in there, somewhere, and the weekly show wasn't consistently reaching it. The Disney acquisition of 21st Century Fox completed in 2019, and The Simpsons became part of the Disney empire. Disney Plus launched in November 2019 with the entire catalog. There was a controversy almost immediately. Disney had presented all the older episodes in 16:9 widescreen, cropped from the original 4:3 format. The first 19 seasons had been produced in. Decades of visual gags composed specifically for the square format were being cut off at the edges. The backlash was significant and swift. Disney restored the 4:3 format, 3 viewing option in May 2020. But it was a telling incident. The first thing the new corporate owners did was accidentally break the thing everyone loved most about the old episodes. The show was renewed through season 40 in April 2025. In what was described as a mega deal with Disney, seasons 37 through 40 are planned at 15 Fox broadcast episodes plus 2 Disney Plus exclusive specials per season, which means the show is experimenting with a hybrid model that splits its audience between traditional broadcast and streaming in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1993. The show will almost certainly reach 900 episodes, possibly 1,000. There is no real argument for ending it that would survive contact with the financial case for continuing. This is the destruction the title is talking about, in part. Not that the show was artistically destroyed, it still makes good episodes, occasionally even great ones. But the golden age created something so financially and culturally enormous that the show became incapable of ending on its own terms. It became an institution instead of a show. And institutions don't retire. They just continue past their creative peak, past their cultural centrality, past the point where anyone would choose to start them if they didn't already exist. They continue because they have become too large and too embedded to stop. The home media story is worth a paragraph because it tells you something about how the institutional weight accumulates. The first DVD release came in September 2001. Season 1 on DVD beginning a run of releases that continued through Season 20. Then in 2015, Al Jean announced there would be no more DVD releases for the show. Then in 2017, he reversed that announcement, and Season 18 and Season 19 were eventually released. There are no DVD or Blu-ray releases for Season 21 or any subsequent season as of early 2026. The physical media market had moved on, but the complete seasons 1 through 20 exist on disc, including a 79-disc boxed set of the first 20 seasons released in 2019, which means that the approximately 200 episodes of the Golden Age and the years surrounding it are, among all others, the ones that exist in the most durable physical format. FXX acquired the exclusive cable syndication rights to the show in 2014 and has been running it essentially continuously since. If you have cable television in the United States, The Simpsons is almost certainly on somewhere at any given hour. The show has become permanent background television in a way that very few things are. Available at all times, cycling through seasons, always there when you want it, and never demanding your full attention. This ubiquity is another product of the economic machine the Golden Age built. The 2019 Disney acquisition changed the show's cultural positioning in subtle ways that are still playing out. Being part of the Disney catalog means the show sits alongside Frozen and The Lion King and the Star Wars films in a streaming environment. The brand association is odd. The Simpsons is, in important ways, the anti-Disney. Cynical about institutions, interested in failure, affectionate toward dysfunction. But the streaming numbers don't care about cultural coherence, and the Disney Plus catalog has introduced the show to audiences who encountered it there rather than through broadcast television, which means there are now viewers for whom The Simpsons is a streaming show that happens to have a lot of old episodes available, rather than a broadcast institution that moved to streaming late in its life. What that means for the show's long-term cultural meaning, I genuinely don't know. The question of whether The Simpsons should have ended, and if so, when, is one of those discussions that happen in corners of the internet with great regularity and no resolution. My own view is that the question is slightly wrong. The show couldn't have ended in 2000 or 2005 or 2010 or any other plausible moment, not really, because the economic structure around it made ending impossible. Asking whether it should have ended is a bit like asking whether a river should have stopped flowing once it reached a particularly beautiful view. The river doesn't have a mechanism for stopping, neither did this show once it became what it became. What you can say is that the show has given us different things at different points. From 1991 to 1997, it gave us roughly 150 episodes of the finest comedy television ever made. From 1997 to about 2004, it gave us a declining but still often good show that got things right frequently enough to watch. From the mid-2000s to the present, it has given us something more like a comfortable presence than an artistic achievement, a show that exists, that produces episodes, that has its moments, and that represents the institutional permanence of something too large and too beloved to stop. All three of these things are what they are. None of them cancels the others. I want to be fair to Al Jean, who doesn't always get a fair treatment in these conversations. He came back to The Simpsons in Season 10 as a writer, became sole showrunner at the start of Season 13 in 2001, and held that position, or shared it in the later years, for over 2 decades. He won 10 Emmy Awards total. He steered the show through its Disney acquisition, through the streaming transition, through pay disputes and cultural controversies, and 30-odd years of continued existence. He was still in the showrunner's chair in Season 36 before handing full duties to Matt Selman in the Season 37 production cycle in late 2025. That's an extraordinary tenure by any measure. The logistical and managerial achievement alone is significant. The stabilization Jean provided when he returned as showrunner in Season 13 was real and noticeable. The Mike Scully era had established a particular set of habits that weren't serving the show well. The Homer characterization issue, a tendency toward louder and more cartoonish premises, and Jean brought the show back toward something calmer and more character-grounded. Not the Golden Age, it was never the Golden Age again, but a sustainable floor. a version of the show that could produce reliably decent episodes and occasionally something genuinely moving or funny in the old way. The modern Simpsons is a different kind of show from what it was in 1994. It's more procedural in a way. The premises are workmanlike, the jokes are solid, the emotional beats are present but rarely surprise you. It's a show that knows how to be The Simpsons well enough to keep making it, without quite having the energy or the specific talent convergence needed to be exceptional, which is a slightly melancholy thing to say, but it's not a criticism exactly. It's closer to a description of what happens to most things that go on long enough. The HD transition in Season 20 is worth dwelling on for a moment because it changed more than the aspect ratio. The first HD episode, Take My Life Please, Season 20, Episode 10, February 15th, 2009, came with a new opening sequence, cleaner animation, sharper lines. The 4:3 era had a visual warmth to it that was partly a function of the technology. The rounded corners of the frame, the slightly softer colors, the way the composition was built for a squarer screen. The HD era is crisper and more precise and slightly colder. It looks better in a technical sense. It feels a bit different in an emotional sense. I notice this every time I switch between old and new episodes. The old ones have a particular texture that the new ones don't, quite, regardless of the writing. The show's relationship to its own legacy in the Gene era is an interesting thing. The show references itself constantly. Callbacks to Golden Age episodes, anniversary specials, self-aware jokes about having been on for too long. There's something slightly strange about watching a show that is very aware of having been better in the past, making jokes about having been better in the past, while continuing to exist in the present. It's like running into someone who keeps mentioning how good they looked in their 20s. You believe them, and it's also a bit uncomfortable. What the modern show does well, to be genuinely fair about it, it's comfortable, it's consistent. The voices are the same voices, Springfield is the same town, the characters are recognizably themselves. There are episodes in the last decade that are properly funny, not just nostalgia activation funny, but actually well-constructed, genuinely amusing. The show hasn't completely lost the ability to do what it does. It just does it less reliably, and the ceiling is lower. Matt Selman took over full showrunning duties in Season 37, with Gene remaining as a consulting producer. It's a genuine transition, the first time someone other than Al Jean has run the day-to-day since Season 12. What Selman will do with the show, where he'll take it, whether the hybrid streaming/broadcast model changes anything about what it can be, these are genuinely open questions. The show has been running for 37 years. It has at least 3 more years contracted. It might have more. It will keep being The Simpsons in some form for the foreseeable future. The Golden Age episodes will sit inside that archive, available whenever you want them, not going anywhere. And Homer's Enemy will still be the highest-rated episode on IMDb. That fact feels right to me in a way I find a little hard to articulate. The show's own audience, over 28 years, has consistently rated as its best the episode that is most honestly uncomfortable about what the show was. There's something there, I think, about what people actually want when they love something. The WGA strike of 2023 is worth a mention here, because it had a direct effect on the show's production. Season 35 was cut from a full run of episodes to 18 because the strike interrupted the writer's room. The Simpson family has been written by unionized writers for its entire existence, and the 2023 strike, about AI usage and streaming residuals, issues that feel very specific to this moment in the industry, shortened the season in a way that hadn't happened since the show began. The show that essentially helped build Fox, that produced the most valuable animated IP in television history, had its episode count reduced because its writers were on the picket line over the same economic anxieties that affect working people in every industry. There's something very Simpsons about that, in the best possible way. The Simpsons movie, to return to it briefly, is worth a small additional note beyond what we discussed in the previous section. The production process for the film was notoriously lengthy. It took years to script and develop, went through multiple drafts, and drew back almost all of the major Golden Age writers as contributors. The credit includes James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, Al Jean, Mike Rice, David Merkin, George Meyer, Mike Scully, and John Swartzwelder, among others. It's essentially a Golden Age writer's room reunion applied to a feature film, and you can feel it in the quality. The film has a tightness and a willingness to commit emotionally that The Weekly Show had been struggling to find for years. The pig on the roof, Spider Pig, the dome, Bart's skateboarding sequence. These moments have the density and commitment of the Golden Age in a way that the contemporary Weekly Show at the time of the film's release did not, which is bittersweet but also quite wonderful, like a reunion concert where the band briefly sounds exactly like they did in their prime. There are good episodes from the Gene era. I want to be specific rather than just gestural about this, because the Al Jean years are often dismissed wholesale, and that's not fair. The Ziff Who Came to Dinner, season 15, is a legitimately good episode. Homer and Ned's Hail Mary passes has moments that work. The Treehouse of Horror episodes maintained quality well into the 2000s. There are episodes in every season of the Gene years that remind you what the show can do when the specific circumstances are right. The right writer, the right idea, the right execution. They're just surrounded by more filler than they used to be. The modern Simpsons has also developed a kind of meta-commentary mode that it uses quite well when it wants to. Episodes that comment on the show's longevity, on Bart's endless 10-year-oldness, on Homer's reset at the end of every episode, are a genre the show has developed in the last 15 years. Sometimes these are lazy, the show pointing at its own structure as a substitute for doing something with that structure. Sometimes they're genuinely funny and even melancholy. An episode from season 23 called The Book Job is essentially a heist film set in the children's book industry, and it has the pace and confidence of a much earlier era. Season 25 gave us Stealing First Base, which is Bart having genuine feelings for a classmate in a way that doesn't reduce him to comic device. These exist. They're real. The show has also, in recent years, found something like a second audience in the generation that grew up with the streaming catalog. People who were born in the late 1990s or early 2000s encountered the Golden Age episodes on Disney Plus alongside the newer ones, without the generational experience of watching them as they aired. For them, the show is a big, undifferentiated archive. That changes the emotional relationship to it somewhat. You can't feel the same nostalgia for something you discovered at 20 that you feel for something you watched at 9. But quality remains quality, and the Golden Age episodes apparently hold up for viewers encountering them fresh, which is its own confirmation of what they are. There's a thing that happens with familiar television that doesn't happen with unfamiliar television. Your brain doesn't have to do the same work. You already know the characters. You know how they sound, how they move, what they're likely to do in a given situation. You know the geography. You know Springfield the way you know a neighborhood you grew up in or a house you lived in for a long time. Moe's Tavern is to the left. The nuclear plant is on the edge of town. The school is near the middle. Springfield Elementary's cafeteria smells, probably, of whatever lunch lady Doris is making that day. When you put on one of these episodes, particularly late at night, your brain settles into the recognition rather than working to orient itself. That settling is, I think, part of why sleep content works the way it does with familiar shows. You're not tracking a new narrative, building a model of a new world, holding new information in working memory. You're just present in a place you already know, with people you already know, watching something happen that is either genuinely funny or warmly predictable, and often both at once. The voices specifically are a significant part of this. Dan Castellaneta as Homer, Julie Kavner as Marge, Nancy Cartwright as Bart, Yeardley Smith as Lisa, Harry Shearer voicing what feels like half of Springfield, Hank Azaria doing the other half. These voices have been performing these characters for 35 years. For a large portion of the people watching this, Homer's voice is one of the very first voices they remember from television. There's a neurological comfort in a familiar voice that studies on parasocial relationships have tried to quantify and mostly just confirmed. We form genuine attachments to voices we hear regularly, and those attachments activate something not entirely unlike the response we have to familiar people in our lives. Homer saying "dough" hits a very specific part of the brain in a very specific way if you've been hearing it since childhood. It's not nothing, it's actually quite a lot. The Golden Age episodes work especially well as sleep content for a reason that's slightly different from just comfort. Nothing permanently bad happens to anyone. This sounds obvious, but it matters. Homer causes catastrophes, but by the next episode, Homer is fine. Bart schemes disastrously, but Bart is fine. Lisa suffers, but Lisa is always eventually fine. The stakes are real within the episode and then reset. You can fall asleep at any point in Cape Fear, or Marge versus the monorail, or You Only Move Twice, without worrying that you've missed a development you'll need to understand next time. The show is modular. Each episode is complete. You carry nothing forward except affection. There's also something specific about the quality of the comedy in those episodes that makes them comfortable rather than stimulating. The humor in the Golden Age is dense. Those are multiple comedy tracks running simultaneously that the writers were aiming for. But it's not anxious. It's not trying to alarm you or surprise you with transgression. It's generous. The jokes come from a place of genuine delight in absurdity and character, not from a place of wanting to shock you awake. Sideshow Bob and the Rakes is funny in a way that gradually slows your heart rate rather than raising it. I think there's something in the timing of it, the regular rhythm of each rake hit, that actually is slightly meditative, though I want to be careful not to make it sound more mystical than it is. It's just that the rhythm of Golden Age Simpsons comedy is relaxed rather than urgent, and that matters when you're trying to settle into something. The difference between nostalgia and quality is worth saying explicitly, because I think people sometimes conflate them when talking about the Golden Age. Some things from childhood feel good primarily because of when you encountered them. The warmth is in the association, not in the thing itself. If you go back and watch them as an adult, you find they're mostly pleasant but not really outstanding. The Golden Age Simpsons doesn't work like that. The episodes from seasons 3 through 8 hold up structurally. The jokes land whether you've seen them before or not. The emotional beats register even if you're encountering them for the first time as an adult with no childhood connection to the show at all. The warmth is real, but it's not just nostalgia. The episodes are genuinely good. That distinction matters because it means what you feel when you watch them at 1 a.m. isn't only sentimental, it's aesthetic, and the aesthetic is reliable in a way that not all comfortable things are. There's a phrase I keep almost using and then holding back from because it's slightly too big for what I want to say, but I'll say it anyway. The Golden Age episodes feel like home. Not in the sense that they're comforting in a soft, unchallenging way. They're often genuinely funny, often quite odd, occasionally rather dark, but in the sense that they're a specific, complete place that you can go back to. That will be exactly what it was the last time you were there. That's rarer than it sounds. Most things change when you go back to them. Your memory of them was better than the thing, or the thing changes meaning as you change, or you find that you've grown past it. The Golden Age Simpsons mostly doesn't do that. You go back, and it's the same. Hank Scorpio is still a wonderful person to work for. The Rake is still inexhaustible. Marge versus the monorail still has a monorail, and Lyle Landley still has a song, and Springfield still wants it. There's a Phil Hartman-sized absence in these episodes that I should mention because it's part of what makes them feel complete and also slightly elegiac. Hartman died in May 1998, a terrible and senseless event, having voiced Lionel Hutz, the incompetent lawyer, and Troy McClure, the faded television celebrity, across seasons 3 through 9. His characters were retired after his death. They don't appear in the Golden Age episodes as they air now on streaming, which means you encounter them in old episodes knowing they ended there, knowing no new Troy McClure or Lionel Hutz is coming. Hartman's performances in these episodes are extraordinary. Lyle Landley in Marge versus the Monorail is a Hartman performance, all smooth surfaces and charm concealing emptiness. Troy McClure saying, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as," is one of the most reliably funny running jokes in the show's history. The absence of those characters from the later seasons is one of many small ways in which the Golden Age episodes feel like a closed chapter rather than an ongoing one. Complete. The Springfield geography as a comfort object is worth a small thought. We know where things are. Moe's Tavern is on a corner somewhere in the midsection of town. The nuclear plant is to the northeast in the direction of Shelbyville. Springfield Elementary is somewhere central. Krusty Burger is on the main strip. The Quick E-Mart is where Apu is. These locations don't have precise coordinates. The show's geography is deliberately inconsistent. There have been essays written about how the map of Springfield can't be reconciled across episodes. But they have emotional coordinates. You know them. And in a late-night viewing context, that emotional geography is part of the comfort. You don't need to orientate yourself, you're already there. For those who encounter the Golden Age as sleep content specifically, rather than active viewing, the density of the comedy actually works in your favor. You drift in and out, you miss some things. And when you surface from a half sleep, the episode is still there, still doing its thing, still funny, and you don't feel lost. That's because the episodes are built on an emotional logic rather than a narrative one. You don't need to track plot to be present in the world of the episode. The comedy is available at any entry point. You can catch the last 5 minutes of Cape Fear, or the middle 8 minutes of Homer's Barbershop Quartet, or the final act of You Only Move Twice, and receive them whole. They don't require the beginning to make sense of the end. One small practical thing worth mentioning before we move into the closing. The Disney Plus streaming catalog is where most people find these episodes now, and the 4:3 option, restored after the backlash to the original 16:9 cropping, is worth selecting if you're watching the classic seasons. Not out of puritanism about format, but because those episodes were composed for that shape of screen. The visual jokes live in specific corners of the frame. Some of them are quite good. Watching Cape Fear in the wrong aspect ratio is a bit like listening to a piece of music with one channel removed. It's still there, it still works, but something is missing that you might not know was there if nobody told you. The other streaming note, Disney Plus now runs a 24/7 Simpsons channel, launched in March 2025, cycling through seasons continuously, which means that at any moment, day or night, The Simpsons is playing. Somewhere in the rotation, right now as you watch this, there is probably a Golden Age episode playing on that stream. Homer is probably at the plant. Bart is probably planning something. The monorail might be on its maiden voyage. Springfield is always on, somewhere, always the same, always waiting. There's something reassuring about that, even if the reassurance is slightly difficult to articulate. The Golden Age episodes are now, at the time of writing, approximately 30 years old. 30 years since Cape Fear, 30 years since Hank Scorpio, coming up on 30 years since Homer's Enemy. These episodes are the same age as some of the people watching this video, which is the kind of thought that arrives uninvited at 1 a.m. and then sits there. Conan O'Brien, who wrote Marge versus the Monorail in 1993 when he was 29 years old, had a 30-year career in late-night television. He ended his TBS show in 2021 with characteristic warmth and a complete absence of bitterness. He's 62 now. He does other things. The episode is exactly what it was. John Swartzwelder stopped writing for The Simpsons around season 14 or 15. His last aired episode was The Regina Monologues, a holdover from season 14 aired in season 15. He gave his one interview to The New Yorker in 2021 at 72 years old, mostly to talk about why he liked Robert Benchley. He writes self-published detective novels now, through an account with almost no profile information. He remains the person who wrote 59 episodes of the most beloved television comedy ever made, and he seems to be fine with essentially no one knowing what he looks like. George Meyer still exists in the background of these conversations, mentioned reverently by everyone who worked with him, not particularly interested in the reverence. David Merkin went back to writing, made other things, came back to The Simpsons periodically to write an episode here and there. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein have been making things together since they were in the 8th grade. Al Jean spent a quarter-century running the show and is now a consulting producer. Matt Selman runs it now. The show continues. And here's the thing I want to end with, which isn't exactly a conclusion, but is what I keep arriving at when I think about this for long enough. Those roughly 150 episodes from season 3 through season 8 are complete. They exist. They are exactly what they were. You can put on "You Only Move Twice" right now, tonight, or whenever you're watching this. And Hank Scorpio will be there, encouraging Homer, running alongside him to ask about his hamstring, offering him the East Coast. Homer will succeed completely and lose his family's happiness in the process and not quite understand why. Scorpio will give him the Denver Broncos. Homer will want the Dallas Cowboys. The episode will end without resolving this because some things don't resolve, they just end. The rake will still hit Sideshow Bob. 22 short films will still happen simultaneously in Springfield on one ordinary afternoon. Lyle Lanley will still have his song, and Springfield will still want the monorail, and it will still be exactly the disaster everyone with any sense could see coming from the beginning. Frank Grimes will still work hard his whole life and get nothing for it, and Homer will still sleep at his funeral, and the mourners will still laugh. That permanence is both the tragedy of loving something past its peak and the gift of having loved it at all. The golden age made the show immortal by being too good to end. The permanence of those episodes is the proof of it. You can always go back. It's always there. It's always exactly what it was. That's not nothing. In fact, for those of us who found those episodes at the right moment in our lives, who carry the voices and the rhythms of them somewhere in the background of how we think, it's quite a lot. And I think what I want to end with, more than anything, is this. The people who made those episodes were trying to make each other laugh. That's it. Swartzwelder at his booth with his coffee, writing episodes by himself because he found The Office distracting. George Meyer in the room, making jokes that the writers in the room found funnier than anything that ended up in the broadcast version. Conan O'Brien, 29 years old, writing a monorail song because the premise seemed funny and then committing fully to the premise because half commitments aren't funny. Al Jean and Mike Rice, terrified of ruining something everyone loved, doing 6 rewrites on the first episode they ran. They were making television for their colleagues first, for themselves, for the pleasure of the thing. And that pleasure, that genuine delight in the craft, is what you feel when you watch those episodes now. You feel people doing something they were brilliant at and that they genuinely love doing. That quality is very specific and very difficult to manufacture, and it's what distinguishes the golden age from everything that came before and after it. The show runs on. Springfield is still there. Homer is still at the plant. Marge is still at home. Bart is still 10 years old and planning something. Lisa is still 8 and trying to make sense of the world. The monorail episode has been available to watch at almost any moment for about 30 years. The rake sequence has been available for about 30 years. Homer's Enemy has been available for about 28 years. They're waiting whenever you want them. They will be exactly as you left them. Good night.